It had been a long time since Tim had moved into his new house. Everything had gone smoothly and he had settled in nicely. It was a nice home and had been in his family for a few generations, and he was proud of it. The only thing he noticed was that every now and then he would hear a faint scratching noise coming from the walls. He thought it was probably just some rats or something, but he decided to investigate. He started to tear apart the walls and found something strange. Inside the wall was a small room with a man living in it. The man was balding, with a long gray beard. He was wearing an old tattered robe. The man looked at Tim and said,
"I've been living here for many years. I found this place when I was just a boy, and I've been here ever since. I can't leave, but I can still watch you from the walls. I've been watching you for a long time, Tim."
Tim was terrified and ran out of the house as fast as he could. He never went back, but he still hears the faint scratching from within the walls of his old home. I had just gotten home from a long day and was looking forward to putting my feet up and relaxing, but upon reaching my bedroom, I noticed something strange. In the mirror, I could see two small, white objects poking out from beneath my eyelids. At first, I thought it was a reflection of the light, but as I inched closer, I realized it was something else entirely. They were teeth. Two small, sharp teeth had grown beneath my eyelids. My heart raced as I tried to comprehend what was happening. Had I somehow grown a pair of fangs? Was this some kind of strange mutation? I tried to pull them out, but they wouldn't budge. I was so frightened that I ran out of the house and straight to the hospital. After a few hours of tests and examinations, the doctors could find no medical explanation for the teeth growing beneath my eyelids. The only thing they could tell me was that I had to keep my eyes closed at all times and avoid looking into mirrors. I followed their instructions and managed to keep the teeth hidden, but I was still haunted by the thought of what might happen if I ever opened my eyes. To this day, I still don't. The passengers on Flight 519 had no idea what was waiting for them in the air. As they prepared to take off, the sunny sky suddenly grew dark and a chill ran through the cabin. The pilot, a veteran flyer, had a bad feeling about this flight. The plane made its way through the clouds, but suddenly the clouds began to swirl and form a face. It was an old man, his eyes filled with terror and his mouth wide open in a silent scream. The passengers screamed, but the pilot kept his composure and continued the flight. Soon the passengers began to hear wails and cries coming through the cabin. The pilot looked back, only to see a ghostly figure of an old woman, her hands reaching out from the darkness. She was searching for something, or someone, in the plane. The pilot was sure he had seen her before. He remembered her from the crash of Flight 519 years ago, the same flight he was flying now. He remembered her as the only survivor of the crash, a woman whose entire family had perished. The pilot quickly distracted the passengers with stories and music, but the ghostly figure of the woman continued to linger in the cabin. The plane eventually touched down safely, but the passengers were still shaken by their eerie experience. No one knows what the woman was searching for on Flight 519, but to this day, rumors still abound that the plane is haunted. For those brave enough to take the flight, the experience is one they will never forget. The dorms in my college were not like any other. Rumors had been swirling since I arrived. Tales of strange rules and the presence of demons. I was skeptical, but I had to admit that the halls of the dormitory were eerie. The lights were always dim, and the walls were lined with portraits of dark figures. It seemed as though the dorms had been designed to keep people in rather than to welcome them. No one ever seemed to leave, no matter how many times they tried. It was almost as if there was some unseen force keeping us all within the boundaries of the building. I soon began to hear more whispers of the demonic entities that resided within the dorm. It was said that they held dominion over the rules and regulations of the dorm, and that those who disobeyed them would be severely punished. I had no idea if these rumors were true, but I couldn't help but feel a chill run down my spine every time I heard them. The longer I stayed in the dorm, the more I noticed the presence of the dark forces. Doors would suddenly slam shut, objects would move on their own, and strange noises would echo through the halls. It was as if the demons were watching us, judging us, and waiting for us to make a mistake. One night, I woke to find myself surrounded by a group of hooded figures. They spoke in a language I didn't understand, but I could feel the power emanating from them. I knew that the rumors were true. The dorm was under the control of some unseen force. From then on, I lived in fear, knowing that I was in the presence of something not of this world. I stayed in my room most of the time and tried my best to stay out of the way of the demons. I never knew when they were watching or what they were planning. All I knew was the dorm had become a prison, and I was one of the inmates. The strange rules all ice cream parlors have is something that has been around for many years, yet few people know about it. It all started when a small ice cream parlor opened up in a small town in the Midwest. The owner of the store, an old man named John, made sure to abide by the strange set of rules. The first rule was that all customers must line up in a single file. This was strange, but understandable, as it kept things orderly. The second rule was that all customers must keep their eyes forward and not look to either side. This rule was especially strange, and it made people wonder what John was hiding. The third rule was that all customers must order their ice cream in a whisper. This was the strangest rule yet, as it was almost like John didn't want anyone to know what he was doing. John was asked many times why he had these strange rules, but he never gave a satisfactory answer. To this day, no one knows why John had such strange rules for his ice cream parlor. All that is known is that many other ice cream parlors have begun to adopt these same rules, even though no one is sure why. It was a dark and stormy night when I decided to stay up late and browse the internet. I was looking for interesting stories to read, and I came across a strange article about a floppy disk. It was said that if you found a floppy disk, it contained a dark and mysterious force that would cause a person to experience a feeling of dread and fear. It was said that if you inserted a disk into your computer, strange and terrifying images would come up on your screen. I was immediately intrigued and wanted to learn more about this mysterious floppy disk, so I searched for it online. I found a website that was selling the very same disk, but the price was quite steep. I decided to buy it anyway, and a week later, the disk was delivered to my door. I was so excited. I inserted the disk into my computer and waited to see what would come up. But instead of the creepy images I was expecting, I saw something even more disturbing. There was a message on the screen that said, "You have unleashed a force that will haunt you for the rest of your life." I quickly ejected the disk, but it was too late. I could feel the dark force seeping into my body, and I felt as if I was being washed by something sinister. I couldn't sleep that night, and I was filled with a sense of dread. I learned my lesson that day. Never mess with the unknown. I threw away the floppy disk, but I still feel the presence, and I'm alone in the dark. It all started on a dark and stormy night. The wind howled, the thunder roared, and the rain poured down in buckets. I was alone in my room, bored out of my mind. I decided to take a break from my studies and turn on the TV. I flipped through the channels, searching for something to watch. That's when I saw it. It was a strange show with a blue hedgehog as the main character. It was called Sonic the Hedgehog. I watched in amazement as Sonic raced through the colorful levels, jumping on platforms, spinning through loops and collecting rings. I couldn't believe how fast he was. He was like a blur. But then something strange happened. Sonic stopped moving. He just stayed in one spot, staring at the screen with his big black eyes. I couldn't take my eyes off of him. I was mesmerized. And then he started to move, he slowly and deliberately made his way to the edge of the screen. He looked right at me and spoke. His voice was cold and robotic.
I'm coming for you.
I jumped up in terror and ran out of the room. I never watched that show again, but I still remember Sonic's cold, robotic voice.
I'm coming for you.
It was a dark and stormy night, and the streets were empty. As I walked through the city, I noticed a strange figure in the distance. He was wearing a bright neon suit, and his face was glowing with a bright blue light. I couldn't make out his face, but he seemed to be watching me. I tried to ignore him, but as I kept walking, I noticed he was following me. I started to run, but he kept up with my every step. I finally reached a safe place, and I turned around to see if the man was still following me. He was standing there, still watching me with his glowing face. I felt a chill run down my spine as I started to back away. Suddenly, he lunged at me and I screamed in terror. He grabbed me by the neck and slammed me against the wall. I begged for him to let me go, but he just stared at me with his glowing eyes. After what seemed like an eternity, he finally released me, turned around and started to walk away. I watched him disappear into the darkness, never to be seen again. From that day on, I was known as the Neon Man. There was once a time when I loved taking baths. I would spend hours in the tub, letting the warm water soothe my skin and relax my muscles. But that was a long time ago. Now I never take baths, and here's why. It all started one night when I was taking a bath. As I was lying in the tub, I heard a scratching sound coming from the drain. I ignored it at first, thinking it was just random noise, but it kept going. I started to become more and more uneasy, until finally I decided to investigate. When I looked down the drain, I saw a strange creature looking back at me. It had a long, thin body and 4 thin, spindly legs. It was a pale white color, and its eyes were red and glowing. I screamed in terror and scrambled out of the bathtub, my heart pounding. Ever since that night, I vowed to never take another bath. I was too scared of what might be lurking in the drain. I never heard the scratching sound again, but I still don't take baths. I take showers instead, making sure to keep the drain covered at all times. So now, you know why I don't take baths anymore. Ian was the most aggressive tour guide in Prague. He made his rounds with a vengeance, always making sure to stay ahead of the other tour guides and to be the first to show the tourists the sights. He'd make sure to push through the crowds, forcing his way to the front of the line, always trying to be the first one to the finish line. But it wasn't just the tourists he was aggressive with. Locals were often startled when they encountered him as he rushed through the streets, often pushing people out of his way as he moved. It was almost as if he was in a race with himself, always trying to beat the clock, always trying to be the fastest. One day, a group of tourists asked him how to get to the famous Charles Bridge in Prague. Ian was eager to show them the sights and began walking faster and faster as they made their way through the city. Suddenly, Ian stopped and pointed to a small alleyway. He told them that the bridge was down that alley and that it was the fastest way to get there. The tourists hesitated, unsure if this was the right way, but Ian was insistent. He kept repeating that this was the fastest way and that he knew the area well. Eventually, they all followed him down the alleyway. As they walked, the tourists noticed something strange. It seemed like Ian had disappeared. They looked around, but he was nowhere to be found. They continued walking until they finally reached the bridge. As they crossed, they looked back and noticed the figure standing in the shadow of the alley. When they looked closer, they realized the figure was Ian. He was standing there, just staring at them. His eyes were cold and his expression was menacing. His stance was aggressive, as if he was ready to attack. The tourists ran away in fear, never wanting to see Ian again. To this day, nobody knows what happened to him or why he was so aggressive. But if you're ever in Prague, it's best to stay away from any alleyways. You never know who or what may be lurking in the shadows.